The silence that fell over the living room was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and thick with the tension that felt like it could snap a person's spine. It was the kind of silence that follows the shattering of a glass, only in this case. What had shattered was the fragile ego of a man who believed he was a king. Despite sitting on a throne made of shared bills and half-hearted promises, Mark sat across from me, his face flushing a deep blotchy crimson that clashed violently with the pale blue of his button-down shirt. The condensation from his beer bottle dripped onto his hand, a cold, wet reminder of the casual arrogance he had been displaying for the last hour. Next to him sat my friend, Sarah. Sarah, with the gentle eyes and the heart that was too big for her own good. Sarah, who was currently staring at her lap, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater until her knuckles turned white. She looked exhausted. Not just the kind of tired you feel after a long day, but the kind of soul-deep weariness that settles into your bones when you are carrying a burden. That was never meant for one pair of shoulders. The air in the room smelled of stale pizza and the lingering scent of the cheap cologne Mark wore too much of just moments ago. The room had been filled with the drone of his voice, a relentless, lecturing monologue that had grated against my nerves like sandpaper on raw skin. But now, after the words I had just spoken, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. "You want another mommy, Mark, not a wife." The words seemed to echo, bouncing off the walls, refusing to fade away. I hadn't meant to be cruel. I hadn't planned to humiliate him. But sometimes, the truth is a caged animal that claws its way out when it can no longer stand the confines of politeness. And tonight, watching Sarah fade into the background while he pontificated about how women should behave, the cage door had been kicked wide open. It had started innocently enough, as these things often do. We were gathered for a casual Friday night, a group of 20-somethings trying to unwind after a week that felt 10 days long. There were 6 of us, draped over sofas and sitting on floor cushions, nursing drinks and sharing the kind of easy laughter that usually bridges the gaps between different lives. But then, the conversation had shifted. It drifted away from movies and work gossip and snagged on the jagged rocks of modern relationships. That was when Mark decided to hold court. He had leaned back, spreading his arms across the top of the sofa, as if he owned the world, or at least, the apartment which, ironically, was leased in Sarah's name. He started talking about traditional values. He lamented the state of modern women, shaking his head with a performative sadness that made my stomach turn. "The problem," Mark had declared, gesturing with his beer bottle, "is that women today don't want to be traditional wives anymore. They don't know how to nurture. They don't know how to keep a home. That's why so many of them are single. They've lost touch with their natural role." I had felt the first prick of irritation then, a small spark in my chest. I looked at Sarah. She had just finished a 10-hour shift at the hospital. She was a nurse, on her feet all day, saving lives, dealing with trauma, running on caffeine and adrenaline. And yet, when we had arrived at the apartment an hour ago, she was the one who got up to get the plates. She was the one who wiped down the counter. She was the one who asked Mark if he needed a fresh drink. "Well," I had said, trying to keep my voice light, trying to preserve the peace, for Sarah's sake. "It's 2025, Mark. Women don't really feel like they need a man to provide the lives they want. We have our own careers. We buy our own homes. The dynamic has changed because the necessity has changed." I thought that would be the end of it, a gentle pushback, a signal to change the subject. But Mark wasn't done. He was just getting warmed up. He took a long swig of his beer and shook his head, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "That's exactly the attitude I'm talking about." He chuckled, as if I were a child who didn't understand the complexities of the world. "It's not about money, it's about duty. Look at the women in the 50s. They didn't complain. They took care of their husbands. They had dinner on the table. They made the home a sanctuary. Now you ask a girl to do the laundry, and she acts like it's oppression." I watched Sarah flinch. It was subtle, just a slight tightening of her jaw, but I saw it. I knew for a fact that Sarah did the laundry. I knew she did the grocery shopping. I knew she coordinated the cleaning schedule. I also knew that Mark's idea of helping around the house was occasionally taking out the trash if he was reminded 3 times. I let him go on for a while longer, mostly because I was too stunned by the audacity of it all. He rambled about how men were the kings of the castle, and how respect was earned through submission. He painted a picture of a golden era that never really existed, a fantasy world where men were served simply for existing, and women were happy servants with permanent smiles. But as he talked, I couldn't stop looking at Sarah. I saw the dark circles under her eyes, masked by concealer, but visible to anyone who truly loved her. I thought about the text she had sent me 2 days ago, panicked because rent was due, and Mark was short again because he had bought a new gaming console. I thought about the fact that Sarah paid 60% of the bills because she earned more, yet she still came home and cooked because Mark claimed he didn't know how to boil water. The anger in my chest stopped being a spark and became a forest fire. It wasn't just about Mark, it was about the injustice of it all. It was about the millions of women like Sarah, who were tricked into doing it all, working like men and caring like women, while their partners enjoyed the benefits of both worlds without the sacrifice of either. Mark, I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. The room went quiet. Everyone sensed the shift in barometric pressure. He looked at me, blinking, surprised to be interrupted. What? You keep talking about a traditional wife, I said, my voice steady now, fueled by a cold, hard clarity. You keep listing all the things a woman should do. The cooking, the cleaning, the nurturing, the silent support. Yeah, he said, puffing out his chest slightly. It's biology. It's history. Okay, I nodded. But history is a two-way street, isn't it? If you want a traditional wife, Mark, you have to be a traditional husband. He frowned, confused. I am a man. That's traditional enough. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. No, it's not. A traditional husband provides. A traditional husband protects. A traditional husband carries the financial weight of the household so that his wife can stay home and manage the domestic sphere. That was the deal. That was the contract. I turned to Sarah, ignoring her pleading look to stop. I couldn't stop. The dam had broken. Sarah works 45 hours a week, I said, turning back to Mark. She picks up overtime shifts. She pays half the rent actually. I know she paid more than half last month. She pays half the utilities. She pays for her own car. She pays for the groceries you eat. Mark's face started to turn red. We're partners, he stammered. It's 50-50ths. That's fair. Exactly, I said, leaning forward. It is 50-50ths. That's a modern relationship. That is a partnership of equals. But you don't treat her like an equal, Mark. You treat her like a servant. You want her to pay half the bills like a modern feminist, but you also want her to cook your dinner and wash your socks like a 1950s housewife. You are cherry-picking the parts of history that benefit you and ignoring the parts that require work from you. You don't know what goes on in our relationship, Mark snapped, his voice rising defensively. I take care of things. Do you? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, you aren't providing the lifestyle that allows for a traditional wife. You can't have a traditional wife when you need her paycheck to make rent. You can't demand she greets you with a martini in a clean house when she just worked a 12-hour shift to help. Keep the lights on. I took a breath, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I looked him dead in the eye. You aren't a traditional husband, Mark. You can't provide for this household on your own, so you have no right to demand she performs traditional duties on top of her career. The room was deadly silent. My other friends were staring at their drinks, terrified to move. Sarah had covered her face with her hand. But Mark, Mark looked furious. He looked like a child who had been told he couldn't have dessert because he hadn't eaten his vegetables. That's just your opinion, he sputtered, struggling to find a rebuttal. You're just proving my point. You're difficult. This is why guys don't want to date girls like you. And that was when I said it. The line that hung in the air now, vibrating with truth. I'm not difficult, Mark. I'm just not an enabler. It sounds to me like you don't want a wife. You want another mommy. You want someone to take care of you, feed you, and clean up after you, while you play video games and pretend to be the man of the house. The silence stretched on, painful and absolute. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but closed it again. He looked at Sarah, waiting for her to defend him, to jump up and tell me I was wrong. But Sarah didn't move. She just sat there, staring at the table, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I think you should leave, Mark finally whispered, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. I stood up slowly. I grabbed my purse. I didn't look at Mark. I walked over to Sarah and squeezed her shoulder. She didn't look up, but she reached up and touched my hand briefly, fleeting, secret squeeze of acknowledgement. I'll call you, I whispered to her. I walked out of the apartment and into the cool night air. My hands were shaking. I got into my car and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, replaying the scene in my mind. The guilt started to creep in, as it always does for women who are taught to be polite above all else. Had I gone too far? Was it my place to say that? I had embarrassed him in front of his friends. I had caused a scene. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and second-guessing. I turned on the radio, but the music sounded jarring, so I turned it off and drove in silence. When I got to my apartment, I threw my keys on the counter and collapsed onto my couch, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed. My stomach dropped. I knew who it was. I picked it up, bracing myself for a novel of angry texts from Mark, or worse, a message from Sarah, ending our friendship. It was Sarah. He's really mad, the text read. He says you embarrassed him. He says you were out of line, and he wants an apology. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keypad. An apology. It would be the easy thing to do. "I'm sorry, Mark. I had too much wine. I didn't mean it. It would smooth things over. It would make the tension go away." But then another text came through. "He's ranting about how you're toxic. But I'm sitting here looking at the sink full of dishes from the party, and he's in the bedroom playing games. And I'm so tired. Anna, I'm just so tired." I felt the tears prick my own eyes then. I realized that my outburst hadn't just been about anger. It had been an intervention. It had been a desperate attempt to hold up a mirror to a situation that was slowly crushing the life out of my best friend. I typed back slowly. "I won't apologize for the truth. Sarah, you deserve a partner, not a project. You are worth more than being someone's second mother." I put the phone down and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. I thought about the generation of women before Uzmai's grandmother, who raised 5 kids and managed a farm while my grandfather worked the fields. That was traditional, that was hard, but it was shared sacrifice. My grandfather never came home and called her lazy. He washed his own plate because he respected the hands that prepared the meal. Somewhere along the way, men like Mark got the idea that tradition meant privilege without the corresponding responsibility. They wanted the respect of a patriarch, with the lifestyle of a bachelor. I knew things would be awkward for a while. I knew I might lose my invitation to the next dinner party. But as I thought about Sarah, washing those dishes alone while Mark sulked in the other room, I knew I wasn't the asshole. Sometimes, love isn't about keeping the peace. Sometimes, love is about handing your friend a sword and showing her the chains she's been wearing. I hoped Sarah would put down the sponge. I hoped she would walk into that bedroom and demand the respect she paid for with every hour of her overtime shifts. But even if she didn't do it tonight, at least the words had been said. The seed had been planted. She wasn't his mother, and he wasn't a king. He was just a boy playing house, and it was time for someone to turn on the lights.